Venezuela expresses concern about the possible return of armed struggle in Colombia. The fires in the Brazilian Amazon are fueled further by soy and cattle business interests. And the leader of the Brazilian landless workers movement praises the Cuban people at the first patriotic forum in Haiti. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. Venezuela has expressed deep concern over the possible return of armed struggle in Colombia. Foreign Minister Jorge Arias responded to news that a group of former FARC leaders had announced on Thursday that they're taking up arms once again. Arias outright rejected the accusations by the Colombian government that other countries are to blame for not fulfilling the peace agreements.
Son públicas y notorias.
The decision taken by the government of Iván Duque have been very well known. In a series of maneuvers within the peace process, they have led to a loss of trust and legal guarantees, to a violation of the terms agreed, and to a series of systematic violations of human rights. These include the killings of hundreds of former combatants and social leaders. It is outrageous that Iván Duque seeks to put his own personal responsibility for a deliberate dismantling of the peace process and the refusal to comply with the agreement signed by Colombia with the world and its own people onto third countries.
En un acto deleznable, pretenda desplazar hacia terceros países.
The decision by those dissident FARC leaders to return to armed struggle has caused a political storm in Colombia. The FARC political party has repudiated the group and reaffirmed its commitment to peace.
Que es piña madura, anunciamos al mundo.
In the early hours of Thursday, the former guerrilla leader Ivan Marquez made a dramatic reappearance. Dressed in combat fatigues, he declared himself the commander of the armed dissidents of the FARC-EP. Alongside Jesus Santrich and Hernán Darío Velázquez, he completely rejected the peace process.
The unilateral changes to the text of the peace accord, the failure of the state to meet its obligations, and the legal trickery have forced us to return to the hills.
Reactions followed swiftly from the FARC political party, the Alternative Revolutionary Forces of the Commons. They said taking up arms again was a grave mistake.
Los firmantes de la alocución.
Those made this announcement have publicly split from our party, and they must assume the consequences of their acts.
Y asumieron las consecuencias de sus actos.
And following the announcement, President Iván Duque took a number of legal and military decisions.
I have asked the Attorney General to issue the necessary arrest warrants to confront the crimes announced in that video, which are a direct attack on Colombians, institutions and society.
The Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the legal body that many former FARC guerrillas have presented themselves to, said the move by the dissidents was a serious challenge to peace.
The news that some members of the FARC are rearming in secrecy shows a failure to comply with the integral system of truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition. It falls in the remit of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace and without doubt constitutes a grave act for the peace process, which with difficult and great sacrifice has been ongoing in this country. Constructing peace after half a century of internal conflict is difficult, and a path of full uncertainties and doubts. However, the parties have complied with their commitments.
The JEP said the rearming of a small number of former FARC members only benefits those sectors of the right who have always opposed the peace process.
A los que quieren continuar la guerra en Colombia.
For those who want to continue the war in Colombia are pleased with this announcement. Those sectors of the far right are almost celebrating, asking for the peace accord to be removed from the constitution and demanding a military offensive against not only the dissidents but all those political forces that support the peace.
Other supporters of the peace process called on the government party to cease its attacks on the Havana Accord.
We need to reflect on why this has happened and all the mistakes and failures of the peace process in order to correct them. I think the answer is to implement the peace agreement more swiftly and back with sufficient resources and political will.
Some observers have said it should now be a priority to develop those zones where former combatants are gathered to be retrained and incorporated into civilian life.
We now go to Colombia to speak with Susana Gil. Susana is an activist with the People's Congress and joins us from Medellin. Thank you so much for joining us today, Susana.
Thank you, Camila.
What was your initial reaction to the announcement that some members of the FARC, which had disarmed, would be taking up arms once again?
Well, to be honest, I foresaw that because of all this, that those things that has been happening ever since the peace agreement in 2016. The social leader assassinations, ex-guerrilla members assassinations, threats, all the breaches of the peace agreement. Those things told us that this was going to happen. So it wasn't very surprising, to be honest.
How do you think this new move will affect the majority of FARC party members and supporters? Do you think they're going to be sympathizing with the FARC party, or will they be sympathizing with those who felt the need to take up arms once again because of the situation in the country?
Well, I think that the supporters of FARC had already made a decision about this, and the break between the radical wing that wanted to take arms and the wing that wanted to make this peace agreement work is very profound. So there are not ways to sympathize with both wings. So I think it is more dangerous for people in regions. For them, it is a very complex moment because of the armed actors that has presence in the regions. So if the armed groups know that they are sympathizers or supporters of FARC, they will be very threatened. But I think it is more that in the regions is the biggest problem for this.
And can you tell us a little bit about who the different armed actors are throughout Colombia? We've just mentioned the FARC. We know also the ELN. But what are some of the other groups? We talk about that social leaders have been targeted as well. Who are they being targeted by?
Well, since the peace agreement too, with the AUC, Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, in 2005, the paramilitary groups has changed a lot, and the government and the authorities don't want to recognize that they exist, so they call them criminal bands. But it is evident that they are responding to a specific interests related with land and the productive resources in the regions. So these social leaders are killed by armed groups that respond to those interests, economic interests of multinationals or national economies. But
So we know that some of the breaches, or one of the most major breaches that we're talking about this week, is the killing of social leaders and former FARC combatants. But what are some of the other ways the peace accords have been breached by the government or any involved parties?
Well, I think the biggest breach and the more problematic one is the substitution of illegal crops in Colombia, because we're talking about the life of a lot of campesinos that are willing to substitute their crops to legal ones, and they already are trying to do it, but there are no resources that the government have to give them. So they are exposed to armed groups that don't want to lose those crops. So they are at this moment lacking of resources to live, but on the other hand, they are in danger because of these other armed groups that want those illegal crops.
One last question, Susana. Iván Duque responded yesterday and seems to be looking for external factors to blame for Colombia's problems. How do you think he'll try to approach this situation going forward?
Well, it's a very difficult question, because all of us know that he responds to very specific interests, and in his speech, even before starting his government, he said that he was going to tear apart the peace agreement. So I don't think that the answer for this situation is in the president. It is in the social movements, in the social mobilizations in the streets, to make people understand that the peace has to be implemented by us, by the people, Colombian people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and for bringing us that insight. We've been speaking to Susana Gil. She is in Medellin, Colombia, and she is an activist with the People's Congress. Now, after the break, we hear from the lawyer of Swedish digital activist Ola Bini in Ecuador. Don't go away. Welcome back. The government in Brazil and some of the media have been celebrating the role of the armed forces in extinguishing the fires that have been ravaging the Amazon region. But as our correspondent Brian Muir reports, the reality is that the fires remain out of control.
Here in Porto Velho, for a couple of days it rained a little bit, and it looked as if the sky was getting clearer. You could see blue sky, but now smoke is returning to the city. The Air Force has been here. It's saying it's putting out forest fires, but there's thousands of them burning. It's way too many for the Air Force to put out. Yesterday, our crew traveled up BR 364 highway. Now, this is a highway that was built with World Bank financing. It was the World Bank that convinced the Brazilian military dictatorship to open up the state of Rondônia for logging, cattle ranching, and farming in the 1980s and 1970s. We traveled up the highway for about 6 hours and we saw fires everywhere. So despite whatever the media is saying, the Brazilian media is saying the Air Force is here putting the fires out, they're still burning, they're still lighting new fires. These fires are going to continue until the dry season ends. And what it represents is a further incursion, a further encroachment of the international soy industry and the international beef industry into protected Amazon rainforest.
You can keep up with Brian in the Amazon by following his Twitter at Brian M. Telesur. Meanwhile, Bolivia's President Evo Morales has said that the whole world has a responsibility to protect the Amazon forest from destruction. Speaking after joining thousands of firefighters helping to put out fires near Bolivia's border with Brazil, Morales said that the Amazon forest is a shared resource that belongs to the world, hence the need for a concerted effort to stop the fires that are currently destroying the Amazon. Last week, Morales suspended his presidential campaign to focus on the wildfires.
It's a global responsibility that is shared with the Paris Agreement. Personally, I didn't agree with it, but it was an important step, and the United States abandoned it. We debated intensely how to face global warming together, that it was an investment, above all else, from the heads of the industrialized world, of an industry that is bringing on the end of life.
Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has also spoken out against the Brazilian government's handling of the fires in the Amazon.
These fires in the Amazon provoked by the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro have really pained us. This is fascism at work in the Brazilian government, which not only destroys social rights, but which has handed Amazonia over to the big landowners, who are burning the lungs of humanity, destroying the right to life on our planet. Venezuela condemns and repudiates this attitude of Jair Bolsonaro's government to hand over the Amazon to its friends in the land-owning oligarchy who are destroying it.
Moving to South America's Pacific coast, an Ecuadorian judge has granted permission to the Attorney General's office to change criminal charges against Swedish programmer Ola Bini. Now Bini, a friend of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, is accused of alleged unauthorized access to a computer system, a crime under Article 234 of Ecuador's criminal code. The change came last minute, as August 29th was when the government's legal 90 days to present the charges expired. Bini was previously accused and jailed without charges by the Attorney General's office for an alleged attack on information systems, but was released in June after being granted the habeas corpus request.
What really calls our attention and leaves us extremely upset is the way the Ecuadorian laws and the Constitution are being destroyed. They can change the charges on the 90th day, so we reject this decision by the judge, and we will ensure that all rights are respected, and not just here in our country, where apparently the law and the Constitution are unimportant to judges.
This Sunday, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador will present the first balance sheet of his government. He'll make an address to the nation and then send his report to Congress. Our correspondent has been out to see how Mexicans are judging the first 9 months of his presidency.
In the middle of Mexico's National Autonomous University, the first democracy fair is underway. Students and academics are analyzing the situation in the country in the middle of what they call its fourth transformation, launched by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
I am pleased we have greater choice in our studies and that young people can participate more in social decisions, but we need more.
It's different and that's good. Some people worry that everything that went before will be destroyed, but they don't understand that if you don't knock some things down, you can't build anew.
Many at the university think that 9 months is too short of a time to talk of results, especially since the previous neoliberal governments left so much to be done in terms of security, human rights and the economy, as well as high levels of corruption and impunity.
The
old political parties have virtually disappeared off the map. They've suffered a real political and social collapse. The new government still has much to do. Violence is still out of control, with 2,500 murders a month.
This 1st of September, President López Obrador is scheduled to give the first balance sheet of his government. On TV and social media, the president has launched a campaign to explain the achievements so far.
We said we'd plant 1 million hectares of trees for timber and fruit. We have already planted 500,000.
Various opinion polls have reflected the popularity of this president, who decided to turn his official residence at Los Pinos into a cultural center and cut his own salary by half, compared with previous presidents. One of the polls shows that 70% of Mexicans have a positive view of his government.
People were fed up with seeing how so many of the elite got rich very quickly through business protected by previous governments, while inequality rose sharply.
The newspaper El Universal published a poll which said that 74% of Mexicans would vote for López Obrador to stay in power if a recall referendum was called against him, something that some members of Congress are pushing for.
Still to come, Hurricane Dorian could be the most powerful storm to hit Florida in 30 years. Stay with us. Welcome back. The First Patriotic Forum in Haiti is continuing its debates on the country's crisis and on the imperialist offensive in the region. Haitian agronomist Jean-André Victor, who also leads the Haitian Patriotic Desalinian movement, said the democratization of the media and social networks has been a key element to unite people who want to save Haiti from its crisis. Meanwhile, the leader of the landless workers movement in Brazil praised the Cuban people for withstanding the U.S. blockade for more than 60 years. He also stressed that the people in Haiti and the region are getting more aware of the ways the United States is putting pressure on their countries.
There is an environment of general indignation, and the popular forces are gathered here to agree on a basic plan. Everyone agrees that the government must go, and the only thing that keeps him in power is the United States. They also agree on the need for a transitional government, because they don't trust the electoral system to call for elections, and there are differences there on who will rule. Then they want an electoral reform, to have a democratic process, and an economic emergency program to lift the people out of poverty, and a constitutional reform in 3 years.
From the International Assembly of the People, with people from the United States, Brazil, South Africa, Venezuela, and Argentina, we want to accompany the social movements in Haiti. In this context, we hope they can build a national agreement, a plural platform to overcome this crisis. We know this situation does not only affect the country, but the correlation of the forces that are in dispute in the continent and the wider world, between the capital and the popular demands. That is why their actions are so important.
Moving on to Hurricane Dorian, the storm has intensified to a Category 3 strength as it bears down on the United States. If the weather system's current track holds, Dorian could be the strongest hurricane to hit central Florida in over 30 years. Residents near the beach are busy preparing sandbags, and many rush to stores for water and other emergency supplies. Meanwhile, the Miami-based National Hurricane Center issued a hurricane watch for northwestern Bahamas. Of Hurricane Dorian, flagship carrier Bahamas Air has announced several changes to its flight schedule for the traveling public in Freeport and Grand Bahama. All Bahamas Air flights on Saturday will be suspended. The airline also informs that the last flight from Freeport to Fort Lauderdale, scheduled for later this Friday, has not been cleared in the United States. This means that passengers who do not possess a U.S. visa will not be processed to board. Keeping with the Caribbean, Guyana's opposition is worried that the merger of the data collected from house-to-house voter registration with the National Register could compromise the integrity of the preliminary electors list. Opposition leader Bharat Jagdeo says he fears this process will cause unnecessary delays in the holding of general elections.
With this merger, the most optimistic scenario is to go to claims and objections in November, because the merger will take about 3 months, and then elections on the 27th of April next year. So you understand that this merger will not improve the database. It is a delaying tactic once again.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.